Welcome to Civically Human, a show that looks at how civics intersects with the arts and humanities. And now your host, Deanna Beachley.
All right. Hello, my name is Deanna Beachley, and I would like to welcome you to this edition of Civically Human. Today I have as my guest Tyler Storlie, the author of the children's book, Two Tribes, which was published in 2019. A little bit from the book. In a land nearby, but a long time ago, two different tribes shared a village called home. But there was something peculiar about those two tribes that caused them to drift apart over time. When disaster strikes, the two tribes must overcome their differences in order to save their village. I guess you'll have to read the book to find out if they are able to do so. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a really nice reading.
Yeah, lots of practice. So I thought I'd start with the question, which I'm sure you get a lot as you're being interviewed for this. What was the inspiration for you to write Two Tribes?
Sure. Yeah. So a few years ago, I think it was around Christmas time, 2017, I was with my parents, visiting my parents, and we were watching the news, and something political came on. I don't even remember what it was. And my dad and I started talking about it, and pretty soon we were arguing about it. And before I knew it, we were yelling at each other about it. And, it was this super counterproductive, use of our time. And instead of us, kind of talking about why we viewed this thing differently, we basically got defensive and were farther apart than when we started. And it seemed to me like this was going on everywhere, and everybody was having trouble sort of talking to people that they disagreed with. And I just sort of had this idea for a metaphor of these two ancient tribes kind of moving apart and needing to figure out how to solve their differences so that they could sort of save their shared home. And so yeah, that was kind of the inspiration. And I wrote the first draft that day, and then eventually it became a book.
Nice. So in one day, wow.
Well, yeah, the first draft.
Right.
There was a lot of editing after that.
Well, there always is, and that's something I think that a lot of people don't realize, once you write a book or write anything, right, that you have to go through and edit several times to get exactly what you want to say, to make sure that every word counts.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's great. I mean, I know that this is something that Compassion in America is really trying to work on and highlight is sort of this communication issue that seems to exist, right? That as people become more polarized, it's harder to have any kind of conversation. Yeah. What do you hope that children will take away from reading your book?
Yeah. So really, the goal, I guess, with the story was to provide some kind of like really high level, big picture metaphor or image for how to think about this polarization that was happening. So we could kind of take a step back and say, okay, is fighting with the other side really working? Does that actually accomplish anything, or does it maybe actually make things worse, And can we take a step back from our own perspective and try to see the bigger picture? And so I hope that this story provides a nice metaphor for kids to understand that when you're being aggressive towards somebody else or blaming somebody else or being defensive, that causes them to react a certain way too, and they become more defensive and more reactive, and that's where we get this big polarization and this seemingly irresolvable conflicts where people just move further and further apart. And so the story provides at least a narrative about how you can maybe overcome that dynamic. And so I hope kids can sort of see that, oh, maybe I don't need to just kind of fight my way through this, that there's a better way to figure out how to work together with somebody that doesn't see things the same way I do. And what's the first step to getting there? How do I bridge that gap? And I hope kids can see that, hey, the way things currently are happening in politics and what you see on the news and maybe what you hear at the dinner table doesn't have to be the norm. People can learn to get along, or at least learn how to disagree respectfully. So that's kind of the message is to offer an alternative narrative to, I think, what most people are seeing right now.
Well, one thing I think that children's literature does quite well, I mean, if we look at all the fairy tales that we grew up with, that there's always a metaphor, right? There's always this grand kind of message that children can walk away from. And even if we think like with the ugly duckling, for example, right, that it on the surface may mean one thing, that there's a larger metaphor, and that actually helps children deal with situations as they arise in their own life, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, and that's often a very useful kind of part of children's literature that I've always appreciated, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you think that there are lessons in this book for adults as well?
Yeah, I sure hope so. I think most of the adults that read it, see the humor in it and can immediately, of course, connect the metaphor to the politics of today. But I think the big thing I hope adults would take away from it is that this notion of you're better off maybe not attacking the person that disagrees with you, but first working with the people that do agree with you and asking questions of the people that disagree with you. First seek to understand, then to be understood is kind of the rule of thumb here, I think. And I think like for me, when I was arguing with my dad, both of us were just trying to be right, really, and neither one of us was doing a very good job of. So it would have been a much better use of our time if I had been asking questions instead of pointing fingers and picking examples of bad behavior on his side and things like that. So I think the biggest thing is how do you be effective, right? Like, it's better to be effective sometimes than it is to be right or correct. And I think we need to step back from, okay, how do I make sure that this other person knows that I'm right about this, and say, how do I make sure that they understand me and that I understand them, and then we can figure out where to go from there.
I think a lot of it often comes down to sort of our ability to listen, right?
Yeah.
that often particularly in arguments, right? that you stop listening to the person and are thinking about the next point you want to make without actually slowing down and hearing what they're saying. And often we all want to be heard, right? Because that's an essential sort of part of, I think, our humanness is wanting that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I thought at this point, I'm going to share the screen and we'll see how this comes up. And this is your author website here that you can find. It's twotribesbook.com for those of you who are interested in doing that. You can actually buy the book from the website, and there's even a handy for teachers and educators, a kit that you can get. You can get 10 copies and receive a school kit as well with teaching guide, which is extremely handy, I think. It's useful.
Yep.
And all right, let's see. I've got to pause the share. I'll stop the share now. And I thought I'd wrap up and just see. So do you have any plans for a follow-up book?
Ah, good question. Nothing concrete. I think there's a couple things I wish Two Tribes had in it that I didn't sort of include. So one is the book is very, very politically neutral and non-descriptive of either side. And so I think a book that can sort of accurately but respectfully sort of describe the differences between conservatives and progressives might be something useful, especially for younger people who maybe don't understand why conservatives and progressives disagree over things and where some of their differences come from. So that I think is something I'm thinking about. And the other thing I'm thinking about is sort of leadership and group dynamics. So how is it that good leaders come to be in power, and how is it that bad leaders come to be in power? And what can we do to ensure that we're picking the right types of people to lead us? And what can history teach us about why retrospectively bad leaders came to power, and what can we do about that? I think those dynamics are something that a whole generation of people probably didn't get enough of. And I think now that we're so far separated from, say, World War II, a lot of those history lessons, I wonder if they're really sticking with today's population in the same way that they were 50, 60 years ago when it was fresh in everybody's mind. So, those are the things I'm thinking about. I don't have any ideas for a book right now, but I think if I do write another one, it'll be something regarding those dynamics.
Interesting. Yeah, I just was curious about that because it seems like this is quite a departure from your training, right? Right? You didn't major in English or anything like
No.
that, right? That engineering major?
Yeah, I studied engineering, so I guess I like the mechanics of things and why things work the way they do, and all that sort of stuff. So maybe that's where some of this interest comes from, I guess. But yeah.
But also, I think that happens to other people too, right? That you feel so compelled by,
Yeah.
you felt the impetus to write something like this, right?
Yeah.
Because of the emotional place that you were in, the psychological place that you were in, sort of everything, right, ends
Yeah.
up playing a role in that. And that's also a good thing. I think that is a very useful lesson for many of us who think that, well, I'm only like that and I can't do this, right?
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
Right?
If you had told me 3 years ago that I would publish a children's book, I would have never, ever, ever believed you. So yeah, anybody can do this. I'm as surprised as anybody.
Great. Okay. Well, I would like to thank you, Tyler, for coming on today to Civically Human, and I appreciate that and wish you all the best.
Hey, thank you very much, Diana.
All right.
Talk to you
Bye-bye.
later.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Civically Human on the Compassionate America Network on YouTube. Do you know of individuals or organizations we should highlight on one of our programs? Please email us at compassamerica76@gmail.com. Thank you.